Most people believe vampires are nothing more than blood-sucking creatures weakened by sunlight, garlic, and crosses, but those ideas belong to movies. In reality, vampires exist on an entirely different level. They possess various powers, including the ability to stop time and control human minds, often using those abilities to lure people, especially beautiful women, into doing whatever they desire. This story follows such a vampire. As it unfolds, it gradually reveals how he uses his powers and what he makes the women do. The story opens with news coverage reporting the collapse of the Saesong-Rayan apartment complex. Because the collapse occurred at a high level, rescue efforts are extremely difficult. With no signs of external impact, suspicions begin to grow that the building itself was poorly constructed. Buried beneath the rubble, nearly unconscious, the protagonist reflects on his life. He sees it as unstable and unsupported, much like the collapsed building itself. With no money, no connections, and no safety net, he feels as though everything he built is collapsing along with him. As his consciousness fades, his thoughts trail off into the past. 1 month earlier, the protagonist is working as a deliverman, riding in a van with a co-worker who warns him to be careful because the apartment complex is new and confusing. A mistake with building or unit numbers could cause serious trouble. The protagonist acknowledges this and reflects on his life. His name is Oh Dalyung. After leaving the military, he immediately began working part-time. With no parents to rely on, his days are filled with early morning work, afternoon classes, and barely getting by. While making a delivery, a beautiful woman asks him to throw something away for her. Though it isn't part of his task, she assumes it won't be a problem since he is already heading down. He complies without argument. After leaving the building, he overhears a child admiring his clothes and asking his father for something similar. The father quickly shuts the child down, making it clear such admiration is inappropriate. The protagonist feels anger but suppresses it, knowing he has no choice. Later, inside the elevator, exhaustion finally gets to him. As the elevator ascends, he notices the building shaking slightly and wonders if it's because of the height. When the doors open, a middle-aged foreign man enters with a beautiful woman. The protagonist greets him politely but can't help noticing the man's wealth, his expensive watch, his luxury apartment, his car, and the woman beside him. The contrast between their lives leaves the protagonist feeling deeply envious. Over the following days, the protagonist continues encountering the same man in the elevator, always at dawn. Each time, the man wears a different luxury watch and is accompanied by a different woman, sometimes even more than one. The repeated encounters make the man stand out in the protagonist's memory, raising questions about who he really is and how he lives such a life. Then one day, the man appears alone. The protagonist notices the change immediately, along with yet another new watch. He wonders why the man goes out every night and briefly suspects involvement in something dangerous. For the first time, the man directly addresses him, pointing out that the protagonist has already reached his floor. The protagonist is startled, not only because he was caught staring, but because the man speaks fluent Korean. Realizing his mistake, the protagonist exits the elevator and thanks the man before leaving. The encounter lingers, quietly setting something in motion. As the elevator reaches the floor, the old man stops the protagonist and warns him to be careful as the building continues to shake. The elevator doors begin closing, and the protagonist acknowledges him before stepping out. Once outside, he places the boxes on the ground and briefly reflects on the man's cold yet considerate demeanor, noting how unusual it is for someone to carry both at once. Suddenly, the building begins shaking violently. The tremors worsen, and the structure starts breaking apart. Overcome with shock and fear, the protagonist collapses to the ground, realizing the shaking is far worse than before. The scene snaps back to the present. Trapped beneath debris, one of his hands pinned under broken concrete, the protagonist desperately calls out for help. Unable to free himself, he accepts that his survival comes down to pure rotten luck, believing he is about to be crushed to death. As panic sets in, he reflects bitterly on his life, how he never did anything terribly wrong, yet had no parents, no marriage, no money, and now faced death alone in a collapsing apartment. He cries out once more for help. At that moment, a distorted voice speaks to him, identifying him as the man who kept staring at a watch. The protagonist immediately recognizes the voice as belonging to the wealthy foreigner from the elevator. When he confirms it, the voice admits its identity. The protagonist asks if the man is injured, but the man dismisses the question, emphasizing that time is running out and that sunrise is approaching, something that matters deeply to him. He explains that if things continue, both of them will die, then offers to help. Confused, the protagonist asks how. The man gives a simple answer: by drinking his blood. The protagonist is terrified. 2 weeks later, inside a city hospital, a receptionist watches the news reporting on the collapsed Saesong-ran apartment. Demolition work has begun, with 15 confirmed deaths and only one survivor. Inside a hospital room, Nurse Bora examines the protagonist. Though he was supposedly crushed in the collapse, he has only a broken arm. She finds this strange, briefly wonders if he works out, then dismisses the thought as she sees nothing unusual about him. She pokes his cheek to check for a response, but he remains unresponsive. As she leaves the room, she mutters that she must be exhausted from working late. Once she exits, the old man's voice appears, confirming her confusion. The protagonist suddenly opens his eyes. The old man appears before him and tells him to stop pretending to be injured. The protagonist, convinced he is hallucinating, sits up and expresses fear that admitting this would land him in a mental hospital. To prove himself, the old man transforms into a ball of energy. The protagonist accepts this demonstration, then asks whether the old man is dead. The man confirms that his body is currently in the morgue. The protagonist wonders if the man caused the apartment collapse, but the old man denies it, stating he never wanted to die. When asked why this is happening to him, the man explains that the protagonist made his choice by drinking his blood, which is the only reason he is alive. The protagonist weakly argues that he only drank it to survive due to dehydration. The man dismisses the excuse. The protagonist asks what the old man truly is. The answer is simple: a vampire. Shocked, the protagonist struggles to process it, questioning whether that means he has become one as well. The old man explains that he is technically a hybrid, since he was not bitten. Because of this, he is immune to sunlight and does not need to drink blood. The protagonist asks what he is now capable of doing. The answer is corrupting humans and turning them into possessions. The idea sounds unbelievable to him. The old man tells him to look outside. Though confused, the protagonist accepts that his survival itself is already a miracle and decides to trust him. When he steps outside the room, he is shocked to see that everything around him has completely stopped. The old man explains that vampires are not mindless monsters as portrayed in movies. The power given to the protagonist is far greater than he realizes, and what he has seen is only the beginning. When the protagonist asks if this power truly involves corrupting humans and making them his possessions, the answer is yes. He asks how, and the old man casually indicates that it is simple, pointing toward a nearby nurse. The explanation leaves the protagonist deeply unsettled and conflicted. As his thoughts spiral, his imagination begins to run wild. The old man continues, pushing the idea further, insisting that all beautiful women can be taken, and again directs attention to the nurse, emphasizing his point. The old man gestures toward the nurse and explains that he has already passed on his vampiric abilities. The power will grow stronger over time, but for now, the protagonist must figure things out on his own. He is given a choice: return to being an ordinary human, or continue living as a vampire. The thought of a vampire's life lingers in the protagonist's mind. After a brief hesitation, he makes his decision and chooses to become a vampire. The scene shifts to the following morning. Nurse Bora is working at the reception desk when two nurses approach her. One questions her about missing patient charts, accusing her of not doing her job properly. Bora explains that she had already printed them and placed them on the senior nurse's desk, but the accusation continues regardless. Though visibly irritated, Bora forces herself to remain calm, apologizing with a smile. The nurse scolds her further, warning her not to smile after making mistakes. As they walk away, the other nurse quietly asks if the charts were actually missing. The senior nurse admits she does not know and simply acted out of irritation. Left alone, Bora exhales in frustration, muttering to herself about how annoying the situation is. Later, she stands alone on the hospital terrace. From a distance, the protagonist watches her. The old man questions why, Even after becoming a vampire, he is still only observing her instead of acting. The protagonist explains that acting recklessly would be dangerous in modern times and reminds him that the ability to stop time is limited to once per day and only for a few minutes. The old man adds that the duration may be even shorter since the protagonist is still unfamiliar with his powers. When asked what he should do next, the old man tells him that further abilities will only become accessible once he grows accustomed to his current powers. Until then, observation is all he can do. The protagonist agrees, acknowledging that he is still not used to what he has become. The old man dismisses the situation, claiming that women all behave the same when they get angry. At that moment, the protagonist is startled as Bora suddenly explodes with pent-up rage. She pulls out a bat and violently swings it through the air, repeatedly venting her anger. Watching her, the protagonist realizes that she is nothing like other women. After exhausting herself, Bora collapses onto the ground, mocking her own reputation from high school and criticizing herself for having grown soft over the years. She stands back up, declaring that if she were still the person she once was, things would have ended very differently, and that only her current job restrained her. Observing her stubborn and fiery attitude, the protagonist finds himself unexpectedly drawn to it, even finding it somewhat cute. He asks the old man what he thinks. The old man notes that Bora carries a great deal of suppressed anger and recognizes her strong, feisty spirit, finding it appealing. Bora checks her phone and is startled when she realizes it is already time to take care of Bread Boy. Hearing this, the protagonist becomes curious about who that might be and asks the old man whether nurses normally have someone like that. The old man admits he is unsure. The scene shifts to the protagonist's hospital room. Nurse Bora arrives and casually greets him, referring to him as Bread Boy while checking his condition. Though he lies still and pretends to be unconscious, the protagonist is shocked to realize she is talking about him. Bora comments on how unusually healthy he is. Irritated, the protagonist wonders what kind of person she really is, annoyed by how quickly his impression of her has changed and confused by the nickname. As she studies his face, Bora becomes puzzled by his expression and briefly talks to herself, joking that he resembles someone she once knew when he makes that face. Before leaving, she cheerfully tells him to stay strong and says she will see him again. Left alone, the protagonist thinks about her words, already anticipating their next meeting. Later, the scene shifts to the hospital resting room. The protagonist enters while Bora is asleep and quietly watches her. The old man remarks on how bold it is to sneak into her room. The protagonist claims he is only there because she irritated him, though the old man doubts that explanation. As he looks at her more closely, the protagonist reflects on her appearance, her hidden anger, and the contrast between her job and personality. He weighs the temptation against the risks, worrying about what would happen if she woke up or if someone entered. He reassures himself that freezing time would allow him to escape if needed. Deciding to act, he moves closer, telling himself he can stop at any moment if things go wrong. He begins touching her cautiously, observing her reactions even as she remains asleep. Her unconscious responses surprise him and encourage him further. As he continues, Bora stirs and lets out faint sounds in her sleep. The protagonist becomes increasingly absorbed, focused entirely on her reactions and his own sensations. Suddenly, something triggers his vampiric ability. Sensing danger as Bora begins to wake, the old man urgently warns him. Bora jolts awake just as the protagonist freezes time. The old man points out that the timing was dangerously late. The protagonist reassures himself that she likely did not see his face and that waking up after everything that happened was unavoidable. Internally, he admits he lost control and went too far. With time stopped and only a few minutes remaining, he debates whether to leave immediately or continue, knowing escape afterward may be difficult. The old man comments that this hesitation marks him as finally acting like a vampire. After a brief pause, the protagonist decides to continue rather than retreat, choosing to finish what he started before time resumes. The protagonist continues his actions for a while longer, watching Bora's face as he does. He gently supports her head and moves with increasing intensity, his expression changing as his sensations overwhelm him. As his pace increases, he becomes aware of how dangerous the situation is becoming and struggles to maintain control. Eventually, he pulls back and releases her, causing her to fall limply onto the bed. Turning to the old man, he questions whether time is nearly up and whether they should leave. The old man calmly replies that it will not be necessary. Looking at Bora lying unconscious, the old man remarks that the protagonist was rougher than expected. The protagonist realizes she has fainted. He then leaves the area, passes through the corridor, and returns to his room. As he opens the door and looks inside, the old man notes how quiet it is. The protagonist replies that he cleaned up properly. Lying down on his bed, the protagonist struggles to process what just happened, feeling that it all seems unreal. He reflects that without his powers, he would never have been capable of such an experience. The old man tells him to stop thinking negatively and instructs him to look at his hands. The protagonist wonders if the old man can read minds. His attention shifts to his injured arm, and he realizes it no longer hurts. Shocked, he stands up, recalling that surgery was supposedly required. The old man explains that by acting like a vampire, absorbing bodily fluids, and subduing another person, the protagonist stole life force and grew stronger in the process. The protagonist acknowledges that the result is good, but asks if there is anything to worry about. The old man warns him not to stay with one woman for too long, or she will wither completely. The protagonist accepts this. Sometime later, as he lies resting, the protagonist begins thinking about what he must do next. Elsewhere, after bathing, Bora feels unsettled. She is irritated without knowing why and recalls a strange dream that felt far too vivid. She cannot understand why the healthy patient, bread boy, appeared in it. Remembering past mornings after similar dreams, she notes an unpleasant taste in her mouth. Returning to the present, she realizes the sensations still feel real, and even her jaw aches. While getting dressed, she decides she cannot just sit still and resolves to go bother him again. Suddenly, another nurse urgently calls for her. She rushes over with the doctor to the protagonist's room. The protagonist greets them calmly, saying he remembers little besides the apartment collapse. The doctor is surprised by how quickly he has recovered. The protagonist politely thanks him. The doctor then asks whether there is any family member or guardian they can contact. Instead of answering directly, the protagonist asks if he can visit his school, explaining that he is worried about absence notices. The doctor reacts with mild surprise upon learning he is a student. The doctor hesitates, explaining that the protagonist has not fully healed yet. The protagonist presses him, asking if there is anything that can be done. Throughout the exchange, Nurse Bora quietly watches from outside the room, peeking in without being noticed. The scene shifts to the school campus, where students move energetically toward their classes. A beautiful female professor asks her secretary to delay the 3 o'clock lecture slightly, and the secretary quickly agrees. Nearby, a female student asks her companion what he plans to do about his poor test score. He responds casually, saying he will simply look for an easier course, prompting her to comment on how carefree he always is. The protagonist arrives at the school gate. As he enters, the old man remarks that the campus is filled with women who could become his possessions. The protagonist agrees, noting that there are few places like a university for that. At the reception desk, the protagonist submits his absence notice. While waiting, he observes the receptionist, sensing her concealed beauty beneath her hat and noting her refined features, thinking that anyone dating someone like her would surely be happy. The receptionist confirms his name as Oh Dalyung. When he acknowledges it, she removes her hat and recognizes him, reminding him that they are in the same year and course. The protagonist apologizes, admitting he cannot recall her name. She introduces herself as Lee Hyejin. Internally, the protagonist realizes that he does remember her, but only from afar. She lives in a completely different world from his, someone he merely knew of, not someone who ever truly knew him. Hyejin suddenly takes his hand, smiling warmly. She expresses happiness at seeing him back and suggests that they study together once he is fully returned. The scene shifts back to the protagonist's room that night as he changes into his night clothes, smiling to himself. The old man notices his mood and comments on it. The protagonist responds that there is no reason not to feel happy. The old man questions why he did not act on the opportunity earlier. The protagonist dismisses the idea, pointing out that there would be no fun in that, and that his current abilities are still too limited, making it far too easy to get caught. He also remarks on the old man's constant impatience. The old man acknowledges that the protagonist is more thoughtful than he appears. The protagonist lies down on the bed and tells the old man to resume his lessons, asking him to teach the other abilities of vampires. The old man replies that there is something the protagonist needs to deal with first. At that moment, Nurse Bora suddenly enters the room. The protagonist immediately recognizes her. She formally addresses him by name and introduces herself as his nurse while leaning closer. As she approaches, the protagonist focuses on her expression. Though she's smiling, something about it feels cold and unsettling to him. The nurse addresses the protagonist again, formally identifying him by name and confirming herself as his assigned nurse. She takes hold of the arm that was previously injured and examines it closely, remarking on how quickly he is recovering, noting that patients do not usually heal at such a pace. Watching her reaction, the protagonist reacts casually, attributing it to having always been healthy. The nurse continues, pointing out that there are no lingering symptoms and that he even went out shortly after waking up, calling his recovery speed unusually impressive and admitting envy. Internally, the protagonist senses that she is probing him. He responds lightly, saying he is nearly ready for discharge, then questions why she sounds doubtful. At the same time, he forces himself to stay calm, reasoning that her presence means there is no concrete evidence against him. The nurse then changes her approach, explaining that she wrote a story inspired by him. She begins describing waking up one night and roaming around, directing the implication toward him. The protagonist responds playfully, appearing to admit it. This immediately triggers her anger. She reacts in shock, accusing him of entering her room while she was asleep. The protagonist counters by bringing up the nickname she once used for him. Startled, she freezes, recalling how she had previously spoken about him carelessly while believing he was unconscious. The protagonist repeats her words back to her, including the way she addressed him, asking if he truly resembled the person she mentioned. The nurse panics, demanding to know what he intends to do and pointing out that he is effectively confessing. In response, the protagonist shows her his phone, revealing that he recorded her words. She is stunned, unable to understand how he could have anticipated her comments or recorded them in time, knowing she had only mocked him once. Still shaken, she repeats her accusation about him entering her room while she slept. The protagonist denies it outright and challenges her to produce evidence, pointing out that he has proof while she does not. After a brief pause, he states his demands plainly, saying he will erase the recordings if she grants him 3 wishes, specifying their nature. The nurse asks what those wishes are, then tries to leave, dismissing him angrily and telling him to know his place. Before exiting, she declares her reputation from her high school days, then storms out, slamming the door and declaring that she would rather quit than be threatened. Once she is gone, the old man comments that the timing was good, but questions whether the protagonist was too direct. The protagonist lies down on the bed, responding that boldness is necessary and claiming he can fabricate evidence if needed. The old man questions this idea. The protagonist abruptly cuts him off, insisting that before anything else, he needs to be taught abilities that are actually useful, specifically mentioning more practical vampiric skills. The old man sighs at De Leon's lack of seriousness. Nearby, the Sunbae reminds Bora to stay alert before heading out, leaving Bora alone to face her growing anxiety. Despite her earlier bravado, the fear of losing her job and failing to pay her bills takes hold. Desperate, she heads to De Leon's room to find the incriminating phone. She searches the bedside and his pockets before turning to the drawers. Suddenly, De Leon begins recording, catching her red-handed. Panicked, Bora tries to lie about checking his phone, then begs him to stop filming so they can negotiate. De Leon ignores her, his expression darkening as the old man realizes this is the evidence De Leon planned to create. De Leon pulls Bora over his knees. Ignoring her protests, he begins a heavy, rhythmic spanking. He mocks her as a thief, striking harder whenever she struggles. He pulls her clothing aside, his strikes fueled by a specific vampire technique, concentrating the blood flow into his palms. He recalls the old man's teachings. While it looks like a common punishment, it is actually an ancient blood art perfected over 5 millennia. The effect is immediate. Bora's screams of anger melt into uncontrollable trembling and moans. De Leon notices she is reacting far more intensely than a normal strike would warrant. He taunts her about her physical state, pointing out how much her body is betraying her. As he transitions from striking to a firm, massaging grip, Bora's internal resistance collapses. The sensation reaches deep into her core, overwhelming her senses. Pushed to her limit, she finally surrenders, gasping out her agreement to fulfill any wish he has, no matter how lewd. Thank you for watching this video till the end. I hope you enjoyed the story of our vampire, especially the way he uses his abilities, and that you had a great time watching this manhwa. To continue the story without any interruption, you can join our channel as a member. The next part has already been uploaded exclusively for members. You'll find the links to join the channel and access the next part in the description below. Join the channel and keep enjoying the story.